But what should be done about Congressman Ilhan Omar, who basically and openly said that her priorities are Somalia first? Let's get into that, plus a few other issues, with Congressman Chip Roy of Texas, who joins us now. Fellow Texan Chip Roy, great to have you on the show here, Congressman.
Yeah, great to be on the show. Well, yeah, I mean, as we've talked about before, I was a prosecutor in Sherman, your hometown. I used to drive up and down 75 from McKinney up to the, you know which building it is, because it's the only building that has those kind of offices in it. And then I also worked out of the Plano courthouse. But anyway, back and forth.
Yeah, man, I grew up going to that federal courthouse in Sherman, watching my dad argue in front of Judge Paul Brown. So I love our common connections. Congressman, hey, I wanted to ask, and I told your staff, when the congressman comes in today, I want to talk to him about a couple of different issues. But, listen, I think that you are a thinker, and I think that you are someone who is focused with good intentions on what is the best for, I hope, obviously your district, for the state of Texas, but also the United States of America. And we do a lot when we come on Fox, and talking points get repetitive and subjects even get repetitive. And I thought, you know what, I just want to ask the congressman, what is, in your estimation, the biggest issue facing America that very few people are talking about, that's not making its way, for example, onto Fox?
Well, that's a good question. I mean, there's probably a lot, but I'm just going to, usually go with your gut. I'm going to give you my first answer. My pastor from the church that I was in for about 20-something years in Austin, Hyde Park Baptist Church, recently put out a post detailing the extent to which the what's called nuns, right, people who have no affiliation with church, is on the rise. So if you go back to these numbers are going to be rough. They're from my head. 2007, I think we were at about 16% of Americans would check the box saying no affiliation, right, in terms of their affiliation with any church, Protestant, Catholic, anything. And now that number is about 28%. That's been about 15 years. We've gone from 16% to 28%. That is stark shift has occurred for people under the age of 50. 70% of those nuns are under 50. And the target there really is it's also heavily males and, frankly, white population. So we've got a real problem where we are losing our younger men in particular, and our younger generation generally. That's always been an issue, right? You've got young people and they're exploring, but they kind of had a foundation and they come back to the church and you go through life. We got a real problem now. So if you ask me if there's something that's a cultural issue, right? And we start losing our soul as a nation in terms of what our founding principles were built upon, when we move away from those principles of Western civilization. It goes to the heart of the fight in Israel right now. It goes to the heart of the fight right now about our border. It goes to the heart of the fight right now in terms of our woke policies and, that a man can have a baby and all that kind of stuff. It's all being turned on its head. So if that answers your question, I'd say that's concerning to me.
Well, here's what I appreciate what you had to say. Anybody that believes in freedom and the concept of limited government also has to acknowledge that society and culture has to rest upon something else that guides morality. Yeah. If you don't turn to the government to define, hey, what's the way to live a good life, you have to have some guiding light, some principle. And it's just a matter of historical fact that in America, that was a Christian-based value system that guided people. And if you are cast adrift and you don't have some affiliation, you're going to seek something. You're going to seek some moral guidance. You're going to seek some purpose. And I do think, to your point, what we're seeing so much with young men, I actually think that, the proliferation of school shootings, I think that the rising rates of mental health issues all can come back to this foundational erosion of, hey, what is it that gives you meaning?
No, I agree. Well, you stated it very well. I mean, I would say, what was it that brought Americans from all walks of life in 1944 to sit in the foxholes in Bastogne together? Whether you grew up in Brooklyn or whether you grew up in West Texas or you grew up in Iowa or you grew up in, San Francisco, you came together and we had largely a fabric, thread that held us all together. Belief in our country, yes, a patriotism built upon, our belief in shared values, the Declaration of Independence, the Constitution, what we taught our kids in schools, but also just who we are, who we were. That is getting torn apart, right? People don't realize, and there's a connection here. 50 million people, that is about 16% of Americans, are foreign born. Now, that's higher than any level, even going back to the 19th century. But it's concerning now in particular because of what I just said, right? We're breaking away from our foundational principles. We're breaking away from having people churched. And we're not teaching our kids in schools that America is great, that Western civilization is strong, that the Constitution is good, that God exists. We're not teaching any of that stuff. We're teaching the opposite. America is evil. Don't believe in the Constitution. Tear down statues of Thomas Jefferson. You can't talk about God. Men can have babies, right? We are breaking down everything that bound us together. So how on earth can you then unite, right? That's I think, the foundational question for us heading into, the future of our country going forward.
So then that brings me to this. I want to ask you about your colleague, Congresswoman Ilhan Omar. She gave a speech. The translations, she gave it, it wasn't in English. The translations of which suggest she said something like her interests are Somalia first, and that her role as she sees it inside of Congress is to guide the American government toward the interests of Somalia. She also talked about her appreciation for whatever it is, the king or president of Somalia. Congressman, and we can get into this a little bit to the amount of time we have together. I think on this, Donald Trump and Ron DeSantis probably see the country in the same way. And that is, and I say that because I know you supported Ron DeSantis, America first, right? As a modern day, not necessarily with all its historical ties is what I'm suggesting, but as a modern day iteration is about hey, should we be electing people? I didn't like it when your other colleague, and I would tell him this, Congressman Brian Mast, wore an IDF uniform on the floor of the Congress. I don't like that. I don't want a congresswoman from Minnesota saying it's Somalia first. It seems to me a pretty basic issue. If you're elected, you should represent America first.
Yeah, well, first of all, and thank you for bringing that up. And I know we're not here to litigate the presidential deal, but I agree with you, actually. I mean, the President Trump, when he came into office in 2016, and then in his 4 years in office, espousing America first was absolutely the right thing to do. And frankly, it put us in a better footing around the world. He was heading us in the right direction with respect to the border. There are a whole lot of positive things to say there, right? I just had my views about someone who could serve for 8 years and other things. And, that's been litigated, and Governor DeSantis has suspended his campaign. But the point matters. We need leaders, not just President Trump as a candidate and running this year, not just Governor DeSantis in Florida. We need members of Congress to stand up loudly to advance America first, and to check and hold responsible those who are doing the opposite. Now, I've got to parse her words and go look at it, right? Whether you censure, like we just recently censured Congresswoman Tlaib for her ridiculous commentary with respect to Israel and Hamas and so forth. So we spoke on the record on that, and that was important. We obviously just removed Representative Santos for some legal questions. I did not support that removal because due process matters. And he hadn't gone to court, and Congress shouldn't go through that. Not to go down a rabbit trail, but my point is, I got to go think about what you're asking. What is the right approach to handle Congresswoman Omar's statements? But they are reprehensible, and they are deserving of rebuke. And I've raised that issue with the speaker and with people in the conference, because it matters that the American people see this. The context of what you're talking about for the listeners who haven't, or viewers who haven't seen it. She was standing in a room filled with people, predominantly, it appears based on the video, to be Somali, pushing that issue of saying, we're going to force them, meaning us, the leaders of this country, to respond to the demands and interests of Somalia. That is a big problem. And that was happening in Minnesota. This is what I was getting at about what's happening with respect to people flooding into our country, 50 million foreign born. We better get some religion really quickly about what we want to do as a country to preserve and protect our own sovereignty in terms of borders and our immigration policy and how we handle it.
Well, so I heard you kind of almost workshopping, and I appreciate you said, I got to think about what the right approach may be, but I could also hear you kind of workshopping and drawing parallels with Santos and Tlaib in terms of censure and kicking out. And while we're talking about DeSantis, I believe DeSantis, I can't remember specifically what he's called for when it comes to Omar, but what did he say?
I think he said she should be removed from Congress, deported, and something else. I can't remember. It was a strong statement. I mean, he wasn't equivocal, and I certainly have that same gut reaction. But I always try to, you got to be measured. It's the former prosecutor in me. I got to go into, okay, what are the facts in front of me? What did she say? What are the standards? What is due process, censure, removal? But we've got to have a serious conversation because it was an absolutely absurd statement by a sitting member of Congress.
I appreciate the deliberation you just laid out there on how, like you said, prosecutorial or calculated you need to be in making sure you make the right decision. But the gut instinct, I think it's all of us in the same way.
Yep.
Hey, while we're on DeSantis for a moment, listen, I don't know. I don't know that you and I ever talked off camera. We definitely talked on camera about DeSantis. I know you were a big supporter of him. Mm-hmm. Something didn't click with Ron DeSantis. It could just been the presence of Donald Trump, but I don't know. I don't know, Congressman. I don't know. And people that love Ron DeSantis have trouble accepting that I can have both of these thoughts at the same time. Mm-hmm. I can really like him, which I do as a governor, and have some doubts about his ability to appeal to the nation at large. And now that he's not running again, it's like he's resonating again, like on this or other issues. Something fell short with Ron DeSantis.
So, I generally speak openly and truthfully, and I will here. I'm particularly close with him, spent a lot of time with him, and I try to be mindful of private conversations we've had. But in broad terms, I'll just say this. Yes, he's been knocking it out of the park since he's suspended. I was in Tallahassee last weekend. The last, almost 2 weeks, 10 days. He's just been killing it on social media. He and his son Mason talking about football games, just not even batting an eye at these tough considerations. Omar should be booted.
Way more personality. To your point, way more personality than as a candidate. So what I've been trying to tell people, I was on the stump, right? I did 50 events or whatever it was across Iowa and South Carolina, New Hampshire. That's the Ron that I know, right? That's the governor who was a great governor. That's who I see out there. That's the husband, the father, the engaging individual. Look, here's the deal. At the end of the day, he was running, to his credit and courage, he was running into the buzzsaw, running into the wind of Donald Trump, who is, a spectacle into himself, right? So you're running into, no offense to Fox, essentially a 20-to-1 earned media disadvantage against, the Trump discussions on Fox and every other network, Newsmax and everything else. So that's difficult, like just mathematically, you're having to run against that. And you have to make a call. Like, go look at Nikki, right? Nikki is trying to go get Democrats, independents, and the softest side of the Republican Party, right? Nobody can actually debate that. Mm-hmm. That's literally what she's doing. Ron DeSantis was running as essentially for a lot of the bloc that supports Donald Trump. It's tired of the swamp, wants the place to change. So it was hard to make a call, like how much do you hit Donald Trump? There are things to criticize Donald Trump for, well removed from any of the stuff that's in the news. Like, for example, I made some of the Trump world mad because I called him out on shutdowns, on Fauci, on the vax mandates and the warp speed. I called him out on not getting the border fully secured and siding with Paul Ryan when they did an amnesty bill in the summer of 2018. I called him out on not getting Obamacare repealed. I know it was John McCain that did this. But you know what? When they came in, he was working with Paul Ryan. Oh, let's do a soft Obamacare light. Look, I could go down a laundry list. I'm not here to bash Trump. President Trump is decidedly easy to support in terms of his love of America, against Joe Biden. I mean, come on, this is easy stuff. But for me, Ron DeSantis offered somebody who had delivered overwhelmingly in Florida. So I think to answer your question, it was an almost insurmountable challenge to go attract the Trump voter away from Trump to get behind DeSantis. Getting 21% of Iowa was pretty good. He just wanted to do better. So, The only one I'd push back on, and look, I don't presume anybody is perfect. No politician is beyond criticism. But vax mandates. I mean, while Fauci and warp speed are things that we could analyze and criticize, I mean, he didn't embrace any vax mandates that I'm aware of. Am I missing something that Trump pushed vax mandates?
Well, first of all, yes. I'll go back and find some quotes and I'll shoot them to you, by cell. I got to go find them off the top of my head. But importantly, remember he went out and he said to governors, you don't have the power to do this. I do. Remember, he stood up and defended Fauci. There are a lot of quotes where he's standing in the microphone saying, this is important. We got to do this. And importantly, he gave Fauci a freaking commendation on the way out of town. Like, look, he's never apologized for shutting down the biggest economy in the history of the world, pushing these vaccines out and saying, you got to go get these things. Mandates notwithstanding, the federal government started engaging in those mandatory things and, military and everything else. I can't remember the timeline of when that happened versus Joe Biden's tenure, but they had set the stage as that was getting released. And he's never said, hey, that was a bad idea to promote.
And I don't want to litigate because I don't have it in front of me either. I think
Right.
the vaccine comes out in like November, December for the first group of people that can get it.
Yeah,
it's then in the spring of 21. And so I would assume a lot of those mandates are under Joe Biden within the federal government hierarchy.
That's correct. But I will say, though, the warp speed push and the hey, for the lockdowns, I have the power, you don't have the power as governors. And frankly, never wanting to say, back away from all of that, I think that's a problem. But anyway, we litigate it. The point is, 3 years of President Trump were awesome, and strong economy, and standing up alongside Israel, and standing up for our border, and standing up for our men and women in uniform. I mean, those are all obvious and easy things to praise.
Let's end it with this, because I know you have a heart out here at the top of the hour. So what is your relationship? I know that when you were supporting Ron DeSantis, Trump said, hey, let's primary Chip Roy. I hear you now. It sounds to me like now there's I don't know. Do you support Trump now versus Nikki? What is your relationship with Trump?
Well, honestly, we don't really have a direct one-on-one relationship. We didn't when he was president. I mean, I went over to the White House a few times. We met in group formats and stuff. But bottom line is, I'm going to support the Republican nominee, period. I've said that Nikki Haley is not who should be the nominee. I appreciate the president. But by the way, when the RNC was playing with the games with, just go ahead and anoint, and he put out a statement that said, no, I need to do this the old-fashioned way. That is correct. Go earn it state by state, go through Nevada, go through South Carolina, and so forth. But importantly, remember, this is funny. I worked for Rick Perry. You'll appreciate this as a Texan. Remember, Rick Perry called him, I think, a cancer in the summer of 2015, maybe, or maybe 16. I can't remember which. And then he ended up being his Secretary of Energy, right? Look, politics is a rough and tumble sport. And look, President Trump knows that, appreciates that. I work very closely with a lot of people in his administration. Russ Vought, the head of the Office of Management and Budget, is one of my best friends. Tom Homan, former head of ICE. Mark Morgan, former head of Border Patrol. I can go down a list. These are all my dear friends. We're all on the same team of what we're trying to do. I think primaries are important. President Trump is, he's not going to hold grudges on that. Some of the influencers out there are a little bit, shall I say, not exactly how you should handle yourselves. But I'll be fine with President Trump going forward.
Well, to me, as I've looked from distance, I don't see a lot of daylight ideologically between you and all these others, that we're talking about. And so, listen, I appreciate you coming on. I always appreciate our conversations. I hope to have you more here in the future on the Will Cain Show.
Yeah, let's do it. Let's, get a beer in Texas or D.C. or New York or wherever. But good to see you.
Sounds good. Take care, Congressman Chip Roy.